The subject of digital transformation is one of the most important and profound in business today. I'm Michael Krigsman with CXOTalk, and on this special edition of CXOTalk, which is sponsored by SAP, I'm talking with George Westerman, who is a research scientist at MIT, studying digital transformation and related issues. George, how are you?
Oh, doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to talk with you. Tell us about your role at MIT. I know you're affiliated with a couple of different organizations inside MIT.
So I got this wonderful job where we can really focus on doing relevant research for companies with the MIT Center for Digital Business. And what we do is we tend to do sponsored research where we get together with the company, define a really good problem, and then execute that project. And what's nice about it is it allows me to do research and work, and my colleagues to do research and work that works in the academic context, but we also tend to keeps us very relevant. And so we tend to do not only the academic papers, but also books. And I know one of the things we're going to talk about today is a new book we have coming out, and some of the work on digital transformation. I'm also with a group that we're just starting called the Initiative on the Digital Economy, and we're attacking problems there that are bigger than we can do with just one company sponsorship. Problems like what is happening, what is technology doing to the work situation, what skills are going to be important going forward as computers advance their skills, what skills for humans are going to still be going forward. These kinds of big challenges are just giant problems that we're able to go through the Initiative on the Digital Economy. So I'm with both of those groups, and it's just a really great place to be.
So you're studying the effect then of digital transformation both on companies as well as on the broader economy as a whole.
Absolutely, yeah.
When we talk about digital transformation, it seems like it's become this great buzzword that everybody talks about, and the meaning is quite unclear, and it seems many people define the meaning based on their particular needs at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe tell us from your perspective, what does digital transformation actually mean? What does it encompass?
So for us, we define it as using technology to radically change the way you do business, and especially the performance and the reach of your company. The way we look at it is there are three kind of elements to this transformation. One is transforming the way you deal with customers, your customer engagement. Another is transforming your operations. And the last is transforming your business models. And companies that we've studied have done one of those or all three of those because they can kind of fit together.
So why is digital transformation so profound?
What's happening is, we've had 50 years of IT that's been happening where computers have been able to get very good at automating things. And that has great effects for companies, not always the best effect for workers. But we are all more productive than we've ever been before. And what's happened in the last 10 years or so is technology now has improved its capabilities. Not only is it primarily about automating and putting efficiency in, but we're collaborating better than we ever could before. And we also computers are able to do things with big data and almost cognitive work that was never there before. These things are completely changing the way companies can take that next step, to move from automation into completely transforming the way they think. So for example, if you think about what a good data-driven approach to customer engagement is, what Caesars does, what many other retailers are doing, what many banks are doing, they're just smarter about what individuals want as opposed to classes of customers. And as a result, they're able to give us a personalized experience that was just never even possible before. And that's become possible because of big data, because of analytics, and because of some other technologies that are out there that have only been in the last 10 years. It's a qualitative change in the way companies are working.
So the implication then is this is important for so many organizations because it's ultimately going to drive very significant changes, as you said, to business model, to relationships with customers, potentially even relationships with employees. So it's getting at the fabric of many of the activities in which a company engages.
Yeah, we studied 400 companies over the last 3 or 4 years, and these companies are not the Googles and the Amazons of the world. They are big billion-dollar companies. They're large banks. It's Nike in apparel. It's Caesars in gaming. It's Burberry in retail. And what we're finding is these companies, the companies that you don't think of as tech companies, are radically changing the way they operate. In addition, the way consumer technology has advanced, we're seeing a radical change in the way consumers want to deal with companies. So if you haven't started this change already, the expectations of your customers are changing, and you need to catch up.
But to play devil's advocate for a moment, you're mentioning brands like Burberry, and I know that you've written about Nike, but these are really large companies and some of the most progressive and innovative in the world. So this notion of digital transformation, is it just for the, shall we say, corporate elite, or are there broader implications beyond that?
Well, the first thing we said in starting this research is all the stories we've been hearing about social media, about analytics, about even these embedded devices, the Internet of Everything, tended to all talk about the same firms. And often they were startups, or they were technology firms. And that's all great, but the best we can find, that's maybe, at most 10% of the economy. So what we wanted to do is study the other 90%, the companies that really are not known as technology companies, and we wanted to see what they're doing. And I think the interesting thing is we found that these companies, basically boring companies from a technology standpoint, are all doing interesting things with technology. But what we also found is some companies are doing better than others. Where a lot of companies are, 70% of the companies we studied are investing in these new technologies. Only about 25% are getting the real benefit from it. And what they're doing is they're not only investing in the technologies, they're also investing in leadership capabilities to really drive change. So you can invest in technology and get some benefit. You can invest in the leadership capabilities and get some benefit. These digital masters, they're putting it together. And that's really where it comes from. So what is it about these elite firms? Yeah, those elite firms are digital masters. But we studied Asian paints. They make white paint. Not a company you think of as an elite digital firm. They're doing amazing things. We studied Codelco in Chile, a government-owned mining company, doing amazing things with technology. So you don't need to be one of the digital elite. We're seeing companies in all industries doing amazing things.
Now, in your research, the framework you developed talks about digital capability and leadership capability as two important dimensions against which you examine these companies. Maybe tell us about that.
So the digital capability is that just investing in new digital things, and we talk about that in 3 areas. Are you changing your customer experience? Are you changing your operational processes? Are you changing your business models? And that's all fine and good, but you can do that well and you can do that poorly. This other dimension is the important part also, which is this leadership capability. We find that digital masters are very good at identifying a vision for where they're going and in driving the organization in the direction of that vision. And if you can put these two dimensions together, the digital stuff and the leadership stuff, then you've got this kind of magic quadrant. That's the digital masters, we call it. The companies that are investing without the leadership, they tend to invest 2 or 3 times in the same problem. They tend to waste a lot of money because they can't integrate later. The companies that invest with the leadership capabilities are the ones that are able to push forward, really transform the companies. We also see that when we look at the financials, there's an interesting relationship too, that the digital masters are 26% more profitable than other large companies in their industries. And so it seems like these are really good lessons, is this idea of being the best running firms manage digital this way. It's a good practice to use.
So you mentioned 26 more profitable. Why? What is the driver behind that?
Well, so we don't know, actually, because it's correlation, not causality. We don't know whether doing digital in this way makes you more profitable, or whether the most profitable companies in the world do digital this way. And from an academic standpoint, that can be bothersome. From the standpoint of management, it's actually not. Because what we're saying is the best run companies in the world seem to manage digital this way. They put the digital capabilities and the leadership capabilities. That seems to be a good practice that you want to follow. So I think what's happening is these companies are very, very good at moving the organization in a common direction, and they're doing this in the digital world, and that's where they get the payoff. So just for example, at Codelco, it's a mining company, and they put in some basic information so they could do a better job at understanding what's happening in the mines in real time, and that's great. But what they also did is they said, let's do more. So they now have automated machinery, large trucks driving around the mines without people in them, because they know where those trucks should be. And the nice thing is if you take a person out of the truck, it doesn't have accidents anymore. So it gets on time with a better safety than in the past. And that was the next step, and that's kind of neat. But now they're extending it. And they're actually thinking of a world where maybe you never need to send a miner underground anymore, because if the vehicles drive themselves, you don't need people down there. Suddenly that's a complete change to the way you do mining. And nobody will ever have to die underground either, which is really just a wonderful, wonderful thing. So what they're doing is they're saying, what's our vision, and how do we execute towards there? That's amazing. That's what these digital masters can do. Other companies would just invest in these three things. They wouldn't tie them together. They would lose out on that advantage of continually driving more and more change.
So George, what is the defining characteristic? Because to play devil's advocate for a moment, couldn't you say that companies that have good leadership are going to succeed, whether it's the digital domain or any other area? So what is it about these companies, and maybe drill into the characteristics of leadership that make them particularly, make the conditions particularly right for them to succeed with digital transformation?
So as I said, it's putting the two together. We do find companies that have better leadership capabilities, but not the digital side. They are more profitable, but they're not driving as much revenue. It's when you put this together with a good, solid digital investment that you get the value, where you get where the improvement seems to happen. As we define digital leadership, there are four elements. Number one, it's having a very strong vision for how you're going to be different. So in Codelco, it's the idea of being as information and digital as they can be through all their processes. And now the vision has evolved to being a world where you don't have to have people in dangerous environments anymore. That's a large vision. It's going to take them time to get there. So you start with this vision, and then you need to make that vision a reality. You add engagement and governance. Engagement is the idea of helping your employees buy into the vision. And when they buy into the vision, it's easier to change the organization. And it's also easier to come up with new ideas. But then you need governance. And governance is the set of rules that keeps you going in one direction. Because once people are energized, they're going to go all over the place. And you need to kind of have a rudder or a steering wheel to keep them going the right way. So leadership has those three things. It's a vision, it's the engagement, it's the governance. And the last that's really critical is that these digital masters, they've got great relationships between their IT and their business people. And as an IT researcher, that was very comforting. We didn't set out to do this study about IT, but it turned out that having the great relationships, driving that great platform, being able to be very strong on building your new capabilities was critical for these digital masters. So that's how we define digital leadership. It's the vision, the engagement, the governance, and the strong IT business relationships. If you got those in place, you can really drive change.
So then if you bring together this leadership with vision, engagement, governance, good relationships between IT and the business, combine that with the right type of digital platform and digital capability, and then mix it all together under the umbrella of strong and visionary leadership, then in effect that's your recipe for success based on your research.
Well, I think it's a little simpler than what you said, because you've added a whole lot of things in there about just have visionary. I think it's more clear. What we see is that whether it be the most visionary company in the world or the most boring company in the world, these four elements are things that you can build, and you can really move it forward. So we studied the Yellow Pages, one of the Yellow Pages companies in France. That's an industry that's in real trouble, and yet one of the Yellow Pages companies said, as we become digital, we got a new vision of what we're doing. And what they're doing is they're basically saying digital and books, it's still the same business. We're connecting small businesses to local customers. We've always done that. But because they set the vision in place, the employees could buy into it that digital is just a new technology to do what they always did before. Other Yellow Pages companies having a little bit more trouble getting there. So any industry, these four elements, set up a vision, put in the engagement and the governance, and build your IT relationships. I think it's a little simpler than the way you laid it out in the question there. Now, it's still really hard to do. It's nothing simple about it, but it's something that any company can do because we've seen it happen in many, many companies.
Okay, and so we've laid the foundation, which then brings us to the next point that you just raised. How do we do it? You're talking about really significant change that in some cases runs through the company, and as we said at the beginning, has a profound impact on their relationship with their customers as well. So what are the elements of successful transformation?
It's the same elements, right? If you have to define that vision and push it through your organization, and that's critical. So how do you define the vision? Well, one way we've seen is for companies to go out there and just start to prospect. We see senior teams go on these kind of learning tours of Silicon Valley and Boston and other areas to understand what technology firms are doing, just to kind of get smarter on what technology is capable of doing. That can be a tremendous opportunity to get your senior team to think a little bit differently about what the threats and opportunities are they face. And then you got to drive this change forward. Now, if you're in a company that's a burning platform, so like the Yellow Pages, right? Your industry is just dying. People are ready to pay attention. If you're an industry that's a little less fast-moving, whether it be pharma or some others, you need to give it a little bit more push. But you got to set up this vision for where you're going, how you're going to be a different company, and you got to drive it through. And those are the elements. If you've got those four things in place, that's what makes these transformations happen.
But it's, as you said, it's very difficult to do this, and there are not that many companies who are doing it well enough to be what you refer to as a digital master. So what are the kind of obstacles that tend to arise, or the impediments?
Well, yeah, so absolutely, if everybody were doing it, it wouldn't be all that interesting. So in a way, the fact that only a quarter of the firms are digital masters is a good opportunity for research, of course, but for other companies. Obstacles, one was just the idea of just inertia, right? Why should we do this? This is hard stuff. Why should we do this? And that's a big issue. Another issue tends to be a disconnect between leadership and the rest of the organization, where this is just kind of the interesting opportunity du jour, and if they wait long enough, it'll just go away. So that's a different kind of inertia. And then one other one that really is getting in the way is IT issues. So if you're going to have this single view of, a personalized, customized, intimate relationship with your customers, intimate in the good way, that's hard to do if you don't have a really strong platform that lets you know what you're doing with customers at all times. If you don't have the integrated view of customers, this is really hard. So you got the inertia things. You got the inability to drive your company once you got the idea. You had the platform thing. And then one more is just skills. Some of these skills are hard to come by. And so a lot of companies are working with consulting companies as they build their skills to get moving. The obstacles are there, but people are able to drive through these obstacles. Some companies are. And the other companies are struggling. They're going to have to learn to do it.
So is this a top-down push or a bottom-up push or both, or how does that work?
We were looking for, you hear the stories from innovation about letting 1,000 flowers bloom and doing everything bottom-up. We didn't see it. These transformations are, every time we saw them, were led very, very strongly top-down. It took senior leadership to say, this is the change we're going to do. This is the vision for how we're going to be different, and then driving that through the firm. Sometimes they'll take one unit to be the pioneer to move forward, but it's being driven down very top-down because this is eventually going to affect the whole company.
But you also need the participation and collaboration of the people down on the ground, right? Simply giving the edict out, hey guys, we're going to change our business model, that's not going to work.
Well, that's why the engagement is so important. Because there are a lot of companies where the employees will just say, okay, I can ignore that because next week it'll be something different. Or where the employees in some organizations we've seen said, that CEO is only going to be with us 3 years. I can wait till he gets fired. and you don't want to do that. So this engagement thing is incredibly important to help your employees to understand what this means for them. Help your employees understand why the future is going to be better than the current world. If you can do that, you can create energy around it. If you can't do that, you're going to get just resistance at every turn.
So the vision and the direction comes from the top, but the engagement and therefore the energy comes from the grassroots. Would that be a correct way of saying it?
The engagement comes top down, but if you don't have your employees energized around the problem, it's going to be very hard to make it happen. Because leaders leaders can't force employees to do things. They can get employees to see it's in their interest to do things, and that's what the engagement is all about. You want to top down energize your company around this problem.
So you need both sides. You need the top-down engagement, as you say, but you also need the participation and the sense of purpose that comes through the grassroots.
If you're leading this the right way, the organization will be energized and will start moving in the right direction with you. And then that's what you want to get.
Now, what about the role of the Chief Digital Officer? That's a title or a role that is relatively new and growing. What did you find about that in your research?
So this is that governance angle, and also some other pieces. Anything you're doing needs somebody in charge of it, and it can often be difficult in an organization to figure out who will own digital. Do we put it with marketing? Well, then maybe that means operations is going to get short shrift. Do we put it with IT? Well, that maybe means that some of the more, the other organizations like marketing and others that don't deal as much with IT are going to get short shrift. So many companies are setting up, in essence, this role called the Chief Digital Officer. And their job is to drive the transformation, to be kind of the point person to make these things happen. So Starbucks has done it. They've done it at Asian Paints. At Codelco, the CIO is doing it. Having somebody who can drive it is the answer. Now, there's a question about that role, who it should be. That really depends on who your company is, who has the right talent and the right context to make it happen. And there's also a question about whether it's a permanent role. The jury's still out on that. You're driving the transformation. Does that role need to stay there after the transformation has started really getting momentum? That also is going to vary by your company. But the role itself, the Chief Digital Officer, it's an important one. And we're seeing more and more companies figuring out how to make that happen.
It's an interesting question because if a company puts a Chief Digital Officer in place, is that simultaneously a statement about the CIO and the CMO, the Chief Marketing Officer?
Well, so you need the role. You don't necessarily need the title. So if it can be driven out of marketing, that's great. If it can be driven out of IT, it's great. And we've seen that in different organizations. But in general, what you're trying to do is you're trying to cross silos. So whoever's running it, it's not really about this person lacking or this person lacking. It's about the ability to coordinate between them. And that's the importance of having a role like this in place.
So going across silos seems a foundational capability in trying to accomplish what you're describing.
Yeah. That's where the top-down push is so important. Because, within a silo, if you're just going to change product development, you can do that with your product development chief. If you're going to change your supply chain, you can do that with your supply chain. And Nike did both of those. If you're going to do social media with marketing, Nike did that out of marketing. Where they got the real benefit is when they started tying this together. They created a digital unit called Nike Digital Sport. And the job of that unit was to start making sure everything was coordinated together so that they could link across these many different silos they had. And it's been a tremendously valuable opportunity for them. It's really worked.
When you start crossing silos, that you're implying different types of relationships among people in the organization. Is there a cultural shift that's required as well?
Yeah, and ideally you get to the cultural shift where people want to work across silos, but that can be really hard, like anybody who's worked in a big company knows. So you drive it. You put the leadership in to really kind of force it to happen. And in a good world, the kind of collaborations across silos that you want will become more natural over time. there are some companies that have said we're going to do the cultural change and the skill building first, and then we'll get on with our transformation. That often can delay their effort by a couple of years. Where if you can just drive it and let the culture catch up, that may be a better way to go.
So the driving, so basically you're saying take the forward momentum, push it, get some results, and the culture will go through whatever upheavals it does, but eventually it's going to fall into place?
Yeah, well, so there's getting the change done, and then there's getting the change, making the change permanent. And so there's an awful lot you need to do on building skills, on changing incentives, on making it easier for people to collaborate. So you build the momentum with some quick wins, and then you add these things on as you're moving forward.
What about metrics? How do you measure the success of this type of digital transformation that we've been discussing?
So a lot of companies go out and, especially the more consumer-focused companies tend to talk about their percentage of digital to physical sales. And that's a good measure. And a lot of companies are doing that, whether, in the yellow pages they want it to be to 75% digital within 5 years. You can do that. There are other measures, though, that I think are the same measures you've always had. We measure this process by amount of days of inventory in it. If you transform it, you still measure along that way. We measure this process by customer satisfaction. If you digitally transform it, you're still measuring customer satisfaction. So you have some digital measures, but I would also argue that the measures you've always been using to talk about process performance are still useful. You just want to raise your sights on how good those things can get because digital is there.
So the result of your business in terms of profitability, in terms of customer satisfaction, these kinds of traditional measures don't go away, but hopefully they're actually improving, and the way that you are delivering on these things underneath may be changing significantly.
Yeah, so if you're only measuring yourself by how digital you are and your customers are less happy with you, then you're actually not doing a great job. So you want to keep those traditional measures and raise your thresholds. You want to bump up the customer satisfaction by a larger number, and the digital will help you get there.
Now, we've spoken about technology, and it's interesting to me because on the one hand, technology plays a key role in all of this, and yet it's not about the technology. So what is this relationship or the intersection between the technology and the leadership and the business outcomes and so forth? How do these connect?
So the big thing is that you can look at it in two ways. You can look at technology as a technology adoption problem, or you can look at technology as an opportunity to transform. And the digital masters are the ones that look at it as the technology as an opportunity to transform the rest of their business. And then the next thing is what are the links to the rest of it? The rest of it is involved in making that transformation happen, which is why the leadership capability is so important. So how do you look at it as first, and then driving the change as the second piece?
So you've mentioned a few times about the relationship between IT or the CIO and other parts of the business. It seems like this interconnection now becomes extremely important. So maybe talk about that.
It's interesting. When we did our first round of interviews, we interviewed 150 people in 50 companies around the world. A lot of them were saying, our IT is a mess, and we're going to try to do this, kind of go around our CIO. The digital masters didn't talk that way. They talked about how their relationship was so good that IT is allowing them to do things they never dreamed was possible. And some of them actually said, our IT relationship wasn't that good before, but we fixed it, and that's how we're in this situation. Digital masters have strong relationships between their IT and their business colleagues. It's at the CIO level, and it's at levels down below that. And it's essential because for all the great ideas on organization change, you still need technology to make this happen. And the technology specialists in the organization, you're better off working with them than without them. Now, having said that, sometimes IT is just not ready for whatever reason. And so we've seen organizations setting up kind of a dual-speed IT approach, where they create a digital IT group within the IT unit that's going to work at a faster, more innovative approach. And then they have to coordinate between what the innovative people need and what the more traditional IT needs. And that can also be a very useful way to work. But yeah, you're not going to do it without strong IT. And it's just a matter of figuring out how to get there.
What about, in many companies, other functions outside of IT are taking greater and greater control of the technology budget? So if you think about marketing, the relationship between marketing and IT is often fraught with difficulty because marketing wants things done very quickly, and yet IT has a set of constraints like security, for example, like authentication, again, another aspect of security, that it has to address. And so marketing then sets up shop and says, okay, we're just going to do it ourselves and leave IT out of it. What's the implication for those kind of relationships in this digital transformation that we've been discussing?
So great IT leaders are able to make the link between the rapid, innovative activity, fast-moving experimental, and the longer-term, really resilient things that you need to keep this stuff running. Yeah, great IT leaders can do it. When you see these shadow IT things popping up, often it's because the IT people have not been able to deliver what they need, and as a result, other people are doing it, and that leads to problems that we all know about. So where you want to get is have the situation where whether you've got dual-speed IT or you just have a great IT shop, where you can meet both needs. Because if you're putting pieces of IT around the organization and they are not coordinated, you got trouble. If those pieces around the organization are coordinated, it works. You're in much better shape. Now, does that mean you never want to put an IT shop into your marketing organization? No. You have them there, but you want to make sure that coordination is there with enterprise IT to make it happen. So, for years in IT, we've had this idea that you've got your CIO and you've got business unit CIOs. And that business unit CIO is a very, very hard job because you live with the business units, but you also have to coordinate with enterprise IT. But that role is essential to make sure that you're not doing things that are dangerous in these business units, even if the business units have their own IT. When the role's done right, it also introduces innovations from one unit and brings them across to others. So you want to make that happen.
In many companies, it seems that the goal of IT is to reduce cost. And so from that standpoint, is it accurate to say that IT budgets or technology budgets are a zero-sum game, so that if money is flowing away from IT into other parts of the business, it represents a challenge for IT, and when that happens, it seems like you're driving greater schisms across these different groups rather than bridging the silos and bringing them together the way it needs to happen inside in order to accomplish the kind of changes we've been talking about.
So Michael, I got a great book for you. We have this new book on leading digital that's coming out in October, but a previous book was called The Real Business of IT, How CIOs Create and Communicate Value. And you set up your question by saying, if IT is a cost center, does that create problems? Well, the fact that IT is a cost center is already the problem. And so this book, what we've studied is how do you turn IT from a cost center to a true strategic partner. We've studied dozens of IT turnarounds. And there's, what we've found is that if you can communicate in 3 levels of communication, you walk a path where you change the way you think about IT, you change their perceptions about how you're doing IT, and you change the way that they work with you, you become their strategic partner. So taking the fact that IT as a cost center as a given is actually the wrong way to think. What you want to do is you want to say, how can we get IT out of that cost mindset, and then the rest can happen. So, great book. It can be helpful.
I'll have to take a look. But how can CIOs who are in this situation get out of it? I mean, I know a number of CIOs where really their mandate is reduce their percentage, the percentage of IT as relative to the overall budget of the company.
I think, what's interesting about great companies that use IT well, they actually spend more money on IT. And so if the conversation is about how to reduce IT as a percentage of, of revenue, you want to change the conversation. And this book can give you some examples on how to do that. Um, if the conversations are all focused on cost, you have already lost. So you need to focus that on investment. You want to focus it on performance per cost. There are some other things that we've talked about in this book to change that conversation. If you take the cost mentality as a given, it's hard to do anything else. You got to break out of that.
So give us some advice for CIOs who might be watching this conversation. How can they break out of the cost mentality into the investment and value mentality?
So in the book, we talk about 3 steps to value. Number 1, rethink what you do and what you think about IT and how you talk about IT. Because if you're talking about IT as a technology thing, then you're actually asking people to only talk about you when they want a technology conversation. If you're talking about IT as a cost of doing business, you're actually asking people just to cut your costs. You've got to change that first of all. Next, you've got to show you're a very strong leader of the IT organization by showing you deliver great value for money. And then you want to change the way investments are made so that every project investment is tied to performance, and you can measure whether that performance hits. You go through that idea, rethinking what you're about, showing value for money as a leader of IT, helping the other leaders of the company work with you better, and you almost automatically become that strategic partner. But it has to happen in that order. It's really hard to have the strategic conversation if they don't think your costs are right. So you got to drive it. You take control of that conversation and drive it. And like I said, this book has some really great ideas on how to do that.
I think many IT organizations, well, what you're saying really makes perfect sense. For many IT organizations, either the CIO and or the IT organization as a whole don't seem ready. They don't seem to have the skills, the communication skills. They don't understand the business well enough. Even if they do, they don't have relationships with the business, and the business is not even willing to accept them in this different, higher value role, it seems.
That's the leadership problem. Great IT leaders are able to turn this situation around, and we've seen it dozens of times, that you take it on yourself to change the perception of IT, and you can make that perception happen. If you're going to sit around and wait for the business units to start thinking about you differently and you haven't done anything else, you're going to be waiting a long time. But what we've seen is CIOs say, we're going to change this. They go through this set of 3 steps, and they are able to change it. But it takes the leadership on the IT side to be willing to go off and try to make those changes happen.
So the CIO is the person where the buck stops, in effect, for driving this type of changed relationship between IT and other parts of the company.
I mean, that should be the CIO's role, right? The CIO should be about delivering strategic value, and part of the role for the CIO may be to change the conversations so that the organization is ready to have those conversations. But the organization is not likely to have the conversation unless the CIOs get out and start changing the nature of the game.
So George, as we draw to a close, maybe give us a kind of summary or recap, first off, of what we should want and expect from IT, what the IT opportunity is within the context of digital transformation.
So I think, one of the things we've learned from this research and this leading digital book is that companies are paying attention. Senior executives made time to talk to a bunch of academic researchers about this because they care about what's happening in the digital world. They want to have conversations, and they're looking for guidance. And as IT leaders, you have a lot of the skills that they need. You just got to step up and try to enter that conversation. So technology-driven vision, that's something that IT people want to be able to do, and many IT organizations have it. There are ways to insert yourself in the conversation. Governance, IT's got this very strong governance in many organizations. That same governance is useful for the digital world. Engagement and getting people to go along with these technology changes, IT people have been fighting that battle for years. And of course the platforms, that's all about IT. So basically what organizations need from the leadership side IT organizations actually already have the skills and the vision and the capabilities to make that happen. And you just got to you got to find a way to put yourself in that conversation, because they're waiting for it. They would love to have the great guidance if you can get yourself in a situation where they're ready to listen to you.
George, this has been an interesting conversation on digital transformation. Any final thoughts that you would like to leave with the people listening who might want to embark on this journey? What words of advice and wisdom can you offer them as somebody who has been studying this with hundreds of different companies?
So, it's easy to think that you have time to wait. It's easy to think that these digital transformations are happening in somebody else's industry. We found digital masters in every industry we studied. And we found that digital masters are not only doing better than their competitors, they're actually able to accelerate ahead. So whatever your industry is in, start paying attention to what the digital opportunities and threats are that you're facing, and start the conversation now, because it's time to get moving.
So the summary is, you have to do this. There's no alternative, and you need to start right away.
Rethink what your company can be with all these technologies out there and make it start to happen. Yeah.
Great. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. We've been talking with George Westerman, who is a research scientist at MIT studying digital transformation. I'm Michael Krigsman, and this show has been sponsored by SAP, and we're grateful for SAP to give us their support. George, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me here. See you later.
Okay. Have a great day. Bye-bye.